So thank you very much, Eva, for coming to Austria, for coming today to this interview. It's really a pleasure to have you here. I'm very happy to say that you came to Austria to support our fight and to support our cause. I prepared a few questions for you, and I bet all of our listeners will be very interested in what the situation in your home country looks like in the Netherlands, and what you think of the protests here in Austria.
Of course, at first, let me say, vielen Dank, Alexander, for having us, because it's very nice to be here. It's very nice to meet the people that you work with and what you've done here with your Catholic resistance movement. It's very, very impressive. And that's actually also what I think about the resistance in general here. So the protest that we went to on Saturday was, I'm 100% sure, the biggest protest that I have been at so far, which is wonderful considering the fact that Austria has half the population that my country has. So you have a very strong movement going on here, which is something that I think you should be very happy about and very thankful for. For us specifically, the reason to come here is obviously to support you, but there is some self-interest in it for us as well, because as you know, we know that this is something that we're going to have to fight on a global level, especially now, first maybe European level, but eventually global. And the European scheme is being rolled out right now. So if Austria falls, all of us will go down with you. So that's why it's very important for us to come here to see the protest up close and see what you're doing here, so we can hopefully learn from what you're doing here and do the same things.
Thank you very much. So how do you see the protests in Holland in light of the police violence going on? So what did happen? What happened there?
So the police violence was quite early on when we started protesting first, at first. And that was, well, I can only say basically unprecedented. So, and the thing is that a lot of people very early on when this police violence started happening, started to make excuses for it, or started to seem or deem it all right. Whether, which was really, really strange considering that if we would have seen these images before the pandemic hit, then if we would have seen them coming from Russia, for example, every single human rights agency would be speaking of it as the most scandalous thing. But yet we see that our police was beating and sending dogs and water cannons out on peaceful civilians, like older people, which is just absolutely insane. And it shows that our establishment chooses the weaker to catch, for sure.
Yeah, that's really horrible. And talking again about your home country, in the Netherlands, I think 90% are vaccinated. You have 10% right now are unvaccinated.
Yeah, those are the official numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why do you think the people comply with those rules? Why do they go along with it?
So I would say there are two groups of people. You have the people who go along with it because of fear. Basically, is the ground reason for it. They are afraid that either they're afraid of the government or they are afraid that they will lose their rights. But I think I have only very seldomly heard maybe some older people say that they have taken the vaccine because they were actually afraid of the virus. But the majority of people that I know who have taken the vaccine, sadly, are the ones that did it because they said that they, thought they fell for the government lie that they would get their freedom back. They fell for the lie that they could go to festivals again, to music concerts, to travel. There are a lot of people who think that you cannot travel if you're not vaccinated, which is not true.
Yeah. As we see,
you can still very much also travel without the QR code. You can still very much travel without being in the government system. But people just don't know because our government's constantly trying to implement this idea in people's heads that this is the way out back to freedom, and people are just done with it. So that's, there's, on the one hand, there's fear. On the other hand, there's a group of people who I think don't fear enough.
Yeah.
So there's a group of people that thinks that this is, just all part of something normal. It's a good way, good strategy. We're doing this for noble reasons, and especially the disease of the modern time to think in a totally utilitarian way.
Yeah.
So you will hear a lot of people say like, oh, what's the deal? You get one spritz and you get a second, and then you get this QR code.
Yeah.
It takes 30 seconds to scan at the door. No worries. In Sweden, we now have people who implement chips in their hands because they
really
think
sick.
Convenient, you know. So we deal with a lot of people who apparently are not able to make any sort of moral judgment on what's going on here at all. Like the only thing that they'll think about is this difficult for me to do? No. Okay, I'll do it. It's fine.
It's really terrible. So you just talked about the international cooperation. You talked about why it was important for you to come to Austria and to support us. What do you think this international cooperation should look like in general? Do you think we could do more together? Not necessarily you and me, but all the other resistance movements. We see a big one in Australia. We both had the pleasure to talk to one of the leaders a few days ago. We see the protests going on in Italy, and not only at the harbours, but also in Rome and so on. We see the protests going on in France all day, every day. We see protests going on in all the other European countries as well. Nobody's really talking about. What do you think better cooperation could look like?
So yeah, we both had the pleasure of talking to this Australian woman who's been a very, very strong voice in the whole anti-tyranny campaign, I would say. And she said something that I thought was very interesting. She said the other side, they have their narrative, they have their rhetoric all lined up with each other, which is true. Like we talked about it in an earlier interview that we did for Instagram.
Yes.
We said all our governments are basically saying exactly the same thing, more or less within the same week.
Yeah.
It's very clear that they have the same plan. They speak to each other, and then suddenly we all hear, "Oh, you're either going to get vaccinated or you will die." For example, is the most recent thing. Orban has said it. Merkel has said it. It's all over. All our governments are saying the same things. They are very much on the same page. Yeah. So she said, "Why don't we do the same? Why don't we try to get something like a slogan or some chants, for example, that we all start using?" And
common message. Yeah,
to have a unified sense so that more people feel like they're not alone. And that's probably the main goal that we should have right now, is to make people feel like they are not alone, because they are actually not alone. Yeah. We are with a lot of people still.
Yeah, that's true. That's really fantastic. You talked about Austria, and you talked about the protests you saw here, and you mentioned the Catholic resistance here. I know it's often difficult from the outside to see a little bit how this resistance looks like right now, so I want to give just one little sentence to it. We saw this Catholic resistance starting a few years ago, but now it really grew. And you saw a few parts of it, not everything, but a few parts of it. What do you think of it?
I think it's very important because it gives a way more broad answer to this than just, we are against this because of, some of the same, I wouldn't want to say empty words, but still they might be. So we were talking about this earlier today, that a lot of people, even when it comes to very fundamental rights, when we speak about something like bodily integrity, for example, a lot of people don't really know what that is. A lot of people don't really know why we, as Europeans, mostly Christians, have always thought of bodily integrity as something that's God-given, which should therefore be upheld. Yeah. If you don't know that, and that's something that is not just in this debate, but in basically any modern debate, I think that we are having right now the case, people don't know why we have the values that we have. So I remember when I started working for the European Union a couple of years ago as an intern, that we talked about the European values a lot. The EU likes to talk about European values, and then they say things like diversity, solidarity, the typical ones. Yeah. And they would never explain where these values came from. They would always just have them like free floating in the air, and nobody really knew why. Not a word mentioned about Christianity, not a word mentioned about, tradition or just our shared history, none of that. Yeah. And I think that that's something that we need to remind people of, and why I think that, the Catholic faith, or Christianity in general, because that's who we are, that is our heritage, and that's hopefully our future, is a crucial element in that, because otherwise, like we see now, these things can just be set aside if something that sounds good comes up and makes people believe that that's the right thing to do. We need to explain to them, no, actually you're being told lies, and have something in return to them to listen to and to see what could be the truth instead.
Thank you very much for this. So one last question. You now go back, not directly to the Netherlands, but you go to another country and join a conference there. And you meet all those different faces and all the different people around Europe. Do you think that there's hope? Do you think that we can win this? And what do you think the next year will look like?
There's always hope. There's always, the faith that we should keep. So there is hope. Otherwise, I think none of us would be right now trying to do this. Yeah. And like I said, we are still in great numbers. And the most important thing is that we keep those numbers as large as we can. So our main job, I think, and I think you're doing a fantastic job, is that it's keeping people close to you. and not having them cave and bow down to what our governments want from us, because with, there's safety in numbers. So the fact that they're doing this first in Austria, I'm actually in this case actually happy about it, because if they did this in Holland, with the official numbers being 90% of the people are vaccinated, I think our chances would be looking way worse than they are here. So is there hope? Of course there's hope. If there's people like you fighting for these things, then there's hope. And there are people like you fighting for these things everywhere around Europe and everywhere around the world. And if we get to unite, and if we get to, I think, also spread the message to not just the non-vaccinated people, but to vaccinated people, that this is going to affect them as well.
Yes.
That they have been told a lie. I hope that we can get more people on board, for sure.